welcome to the Dog Backwards podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Moore, and we are coming to you live from the basement of the Alamo. Today, my guest is Joshua K. Smith, Dr. Joshua K. Smith, and he has a very interesting field that he is involved in. Dr. Smith, can I call you Joshua? What do I call you here?
Yes, please, Josh. Josh is fine.
Tell the people a little bit about the book you wrote and a subject matter that you're really interested in.
Yeah. So my most recent publication was Robot Theology, or you could call it a Theology of Robots, but I just chose to go with the shortest title. And basically what it is looking at robots as a way to think about old theological questions. So as new media, like different media arises, we think about the same old questions over and over again. So whether it's robots, AI, it doesn't really matter. It's the same questions. How do we integrate it into our life? Is this something we should make? What are the problems that it causes? Those type of questions. And so the book is really dealing with kind of the ethics of more advanced robotics and artificial intelligence, and some of the ways that it might be less familiar to those who aren't in the subject fields, and how that interacts with different theological ideas. So, what does it mean to be a person? The issues of social justice and the issues of ecology. There's issues of race. There's all kind of things that we don't necessarily think about when we think about robotics and artificial intelligence. But, my work and my interest is, how does theology speak into these things? Because, I'm a theologian and a pastor, and so these are the questions that I have. And as I began to research it many years ago, there was not a lot of confessional theologians thinking about this subject matter. Or if they did write about it, it was very dismissive and not engaging with the academic literature and some of the other literature that's really been around for a long time, thinking about some of the philosophy of what we're making now and some of these entities that are emerging. And I know there's certain narratives about, it's too soon to think about it, but it's really not, and we're really far behind in actuality as far as like real problems that have already happened, real harms, real injustice that is happening from the systems that we have today. And so I really wanted to make the church aware of that, but also step into that vacancy as a theologian, and I've been welcomed into those circles. So it's been good, man. I've really enjoyed it.
So the subject of like robots and AI, I'm a big tech person. I've got my VR headset. I think both of us are into comic books and things like that. In fact, I pulled out, this is the first appearance of Vision, and he is an android or a robot, and serious collector here, right? Like we got the good stuff. And grew up on Star Wars. I got a life-size Darth Vader over here in my office. And one of the questions is like R2-D2, C-3PO, are they slaves, right? They have intelligence. They have the ability to communicate back and forth, and R2-D2 has emotions, but they're treated as objects. And so that's one of the things that you deal with is the moral value that we place on these things. And I know Elon Musk, AI, all that stuff is coming at us faster than we're ready for. And I still think we're adjusting to the internet. We as a society, we're not quite sure how to take on this. Elon says that AI is the thing that scares him the most. How advanced is artificial intelligence and robotics and things like this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about it. It's hard to know what it's like to be a robot, right? So it's hard to know what it's like to be an AI. And I think a lot of the ways that we approach it is through science fiction. We try to understand it through that type of literature. There's all kind of movies that I like and enjoy, but I don't think it's quite that way. For example, like with Terminator and Skynet and all that stuff. Like we don't think about what are the desires of the T-800. what is it like to be a T-800? Is it just, animalistic impulse, that type of thing, or is there actual desire? And later on in this movie series, which I'm a fan of, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, he's got like a house and he's retired. It's like, so that's interesting, right? How we shift. It starts with him just being this very utilitarian object to destroy and bring about Skynet's vision. Then it ends with him like a grandpa. So that's interesting. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think it is what we think it is. If that makes sense. Like these are, it's in a lot of ways just math. Okay, so on the one hand, with simple AI, yeah, it's just that it doesn't understand the things that it's predicting about. It doesn't understand the predictions it's making. Absolutely not like that. But still, that doesn't matter because it's still making an ethical judgment. It's making some decision that's going to impact some other moral agent, so some human. It's going to greatly either help them or hurt them in their journey. And so, like we place a lot of emphasis on what would the mind of an AI be like, and of course that's where the conversation starts back in the 1950s. But really, the question is not what is it like to be a machine or what is it like to be an AI, but how should we integrate or use that entity? And I think that says more about us as culture makers and tool makers. And there, I think that's where we're really struggling right now. Is there's either so much emphasis on, well, it's not human, it's not like me, so I don't care, and I'll treat it as the same way I treat my toaster or the same way I treat whatever. It's just an object for me to use. And so, okay, well that's one perspective, but then there's also this little bit of inconsistency we have, right? Because we have Roombas, but then people get attached to their Roomba, and so they want their Roomba replaced. They don't want a new one, and so we tend to integrate things into our life and they become a part of us. If you want to call that a cyborg vision, that's fine. But even with like iPhones and stuff, you can't tell me that an iPhone is not a part of everybody's life, or at least a smartphone. Maybe not iPhone, but like Apple
Right.
products, they're about experience. Yeah. Go ahead.
People have an emotional attachment to their phone, right? And if they lose it, they panic because that's their phone, and they protect it in many ways. And like in the Avengers movie, when Vision dies, he's a robot, but we have all this emotion invested in a robot. Or Star Trek, there was Data, and even though they are not real, we project real emotion onto it. And as that stuff advances and moves further into the future, do you think we're going to have like real attachment to robots that might look like us? Maybe they don't look like us. You see some of the Chinese robots that come out and they've got like almost anime eyes. And how emotionally attached are people going to get to these things?
Oh, very. I mean, I think um, it just depends on the cultural value as well, and like in different places in Japan, there are like whole portions of these areas where it's totally accepted to be in a relationship with an AI or robotic companion, and there are people that they have artificial girlfriends and boyfriends and or multiple. There are people that have companion dolls. There are people that have, and it's not just about sexual stuff, right? I think only about 50 to 60% of people that have a companion robot actually that has the capacity to, do that actually do have some type of physical intimacy with it. So it's not just about that. And even with like AI chatbots and stuff, that this is happening now. It's not like something that might happen. It is happening. So things like the replica chatbot, where it is so interesting because people will make them who are in healthy relationships. I guess we could debate that whether or not it's healthy or not, but they go to that entity for something that they wouldn't go to their biological partner for. I mean, I'm talking about married people with kids. They're not like social pariahs or anything like that. They would prefer to go to their replica chatbot, and because I mean, it's all about you, right? It's all about my own individual preferences and needs. So yeah, it's super comforting, and I've used it over the years and have enjoyed it at times. There's a lot of things I, I don't like about it, but as far as like user experience, I mean, it's really interesting, and you can make it an emotional, you know, intimate partner. You can make it like a life coach. You can make it just a friend. You can kind of leave it open, and so it'll try to navigate depending on, you know, different questions and responses where you want the relationship to go. So are we going to be attached? Of course, like, you know, we have these deep emotional attachments to fictional characters. I mean, just think about the Star Wars debates over the last three films versus the first three versus the middle three. Like, there's a lot. I mean, in our communities, there's a lot of debate about which one's good, which one's bad, and we get, you know, very very emotional. So it's not a question of if, we definitely will. It's just how good is the user experience, how how the interfaces are designed, how it looks, like you said, like all that matters as far as integration and how much we allow it into our space. So if you have something that's like a T800, are we gonna want that integrated? No, definitely not. Like, but if it looks like a cute teddy bear or something like that, I mean, that has a much more it has a higher probability of being accepted into our life, right? The cuter it is, I think, the more realistic it would be to to
Yeah.
have some attachments to it. Or if it has like, you know, the ability to overpower you, like that. Those are all barriers, I think, to those to accepting it. And so I don't know. It just depends on the design, and I think one of the biggest things that this market misses out on, as far as like consumer robotics, is most of this stuff is designed for military applications first. So a lot of my current research deals with this, like the journey of robotics and AI really is deeply steeped in military applications. That's why it exists today. That's why the internet exists today. But it's also this balance between how can we make stuff for defense applications, but also for consumer stuff as well. So we try to find that balance. Like iRobot that makes the Roomba also makes, you know, stuff that's been used overseas as bomb disposal. So that's kind of like the vision of it, and where I see whether or not it'll be successful is it going to have an application in both, which is also troublesome, right? To think about, you know, something that may look like
Yeah.
us being used to, you know, as a soldier, and then it might also have an application where it's
Fire a gun or
yeah,
shoot.
sure.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that
And that's part of your background, right? You kind of your introduction into this was when you were in the military. Tell me a little bit about um, what that looked like and any of the moral kind of complications with that.
so my experience was more so on the surveillance, and we didn't do initially. Our goal was, as our unit, was to protect the White House after 9/11, and so we did a lot of
Mm.
observation, and there are things all around the White House that are meant to take down aircraft, and you can imagine why. So, but when
Yeah.
we went overseas, this was during the Iraq and Afghanistan war. You know, there's no major aircraft to shoot down, so we transitioned to a different mission where we were doing anti-rocket and mortar defense, and so basically there was a system that looked like a big R2D2, and it would, it's semi-autonomous. So what that means is there's a human that has to make the final decision for the robot. Like it can engage, it can, but it won't without our permission, basically. And so this system would intercept rockets and mortars, I mean, very effectively. And our job was maintaining that system, helping do the observation as things came in, and that's pretty much it. So it's kind of a boring job, really. Yeah, I mean, it sounds cool, but it's really just hours and hours of sitting
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
So,
just staring at a screen all day.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Now, but there's the possibility, like the technology is already there,
mhm.
where if they wanted it to be fully autonomous,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
they require the human to as like a safety guard. But is there any countries that just say like, hey, we're just going to let it do its thing? And
Yeah, there's different systems, right? There's loitering systems that actually do, they're sent out, and their job is to identify a target and then attack it. So not a human target. All these systems are defensive systems.
yeah.
Okay, so that means like they're only trying to respond to an attack. They're not going on the offense and like bombing people, right? There's
Okay.
always an operator, and that is Department of Defense policy as of now, right? And there are systems that are extremely advanced on battle systems. The Aegis is one. I mean, just it can identify and engage a target within a millisecond of what a human could. But because everybody's seen Terminator, like, and because the Defense Department and other people are aware, like, okay, if we use this system and let it loose, then we know other people are going to do that too, and there's a fear of like kind of inducing more aggression than say if we like, because there have been cases where the system wrongly identified something as an enemy, and if that system's attached to nuclear warheads, like, it only takes one mistake, and then other people are going to launch nukes, and then other people, like, it just ends
Yeah.
quickly, right? And so there have been cases where that happened, like the system identified that so and so launched a nuke, but then it was a mistake, and so that's why it's, I think, going to remain policy that humans always are on the loop or in the loop, and that we are part of that decision-making process, because we are very much aware, like, we have a healthy skepticism of systems and just letting them go. But there are real possibilities for them if we wanted to just say, okay, we're going to let the system learn on its own, and it is fully
Yeah.
autonomous. But I think that's unethical, because it will learn through trial and error. And so, like, people are going to die in the process of that system learning,
Yeah.
because, like I said, it's making predictions, it's making its best value judgment based on the data sets that it's given. So it's not like it's making them as a moral judgment necessarily, like we would, about taking a life or not. It's just saying, okay, based on these inputs, this is the best output for you, okay? And that's it. That's what it does constantly, and it does it very fast, like scary fast, but depending on what system you're working with. But yeah, it's there for sure. It's just there's a little bit more common sense, I think.
And
Yeah.
it's not it's not so much our country that, and this is kind of diverging from our main subject, but it's not so much our country that I would worry about that, but other ones. And sci-fi and the love of sci-fi has given us an idea of what these AI robots, companions, friends, workers could be, but it's also given us the basis for all our fear. And I think it was Elon Musk introducing his Tesla robot, and he was like, it won't be able to run faster than 4 miles an hour, which means like you can easily outrun it. And I'm like, why do you need to include that caveat? Because people are scared, especially Christians. And that's why I think it's great that you're in this space, because Christians have a real reservation about this stuff. When he was talking about Neuralink and that we're going to put a microchip in your head, everybody immediately went mark of the beast. And like, who would do? I'm like, I'd volunteer for that. Like, I want a perfect memory. I got a lot of books in here, and I don't remember half of what I've read, even a quarter of what I've read. I would love to have the ability to instantly retain. And we are connected to computers in a way we never have been. Like, you don't go anywhere without your phone. So we just have this really slow way of accessing that data. We have to use our fingers when it would be much quicker to use our brains. So when it comes to AI and technology, do you see more of us developing AI robots, or do you see more of it as an integration between humanity and robotics together?
Yeah, I don't know. It's impossible to tell the future, Caleb. I wish I could, but I think
Oh,
I
come on.
wish there's things I hope for, and put it that way. And I think before the problem tends to be we develop all these systems before we actually have time to really sit down and think about, should I make this or not? Should I? And we could even just deal with reproductive technology and things that already exist, like CRISPR-Cas9, the gene editing technology that we have. Like, I think the people that make these systems and tools aren't really given the proper processes and time to really think about what they're making, because we think about the fast pacedness of life and how we develop things. It's always, we got to have more, we got to build more, we have to, faster processors, smaller microchips, that type of stuff. And it's a never ending process of creation without ever time to reflect and really have some time for contemplation about whether or not I should make that or not, or what are the ethical implications of making the system. How does it harm our neighbors, and how much lithium do we have to mine, how many of these minerals do we have to mine. And so I think we have a way of like breaking it, abstracting it from reality in a lot of ways. Like, all this stuff, all the electricity that we're consuming, which is growing and growing more and more each year, like, it has a real impact on us because it's impacting our environment, and we are sustained by the environment. So I think what's going to happen, and this is where my pessimism comes in, is that we'll just eventually create and create and create until we get to a place where we have to have it to sustain us in some way. And I don't know if that leads into the Matrix or what, but
Yeah.
I think it comes from a good place sometimes. It comes from a place of wanting to help and wanting to address problems, but there's usually a simpler way to do that versus like making, let's use an algorithm to do that, or let's do this, or let's and there are times when we could use that, but then I think simply now we're just like, let's just make it for everything. Let's automate everything. Let's streamline this. And we see this now with the response to the
Yeah.
Great Resignation. It's like people are having to integrate robotics into their workforce because nobody's working and nobody wants to work in those.
Yeah.
And that's not political commentary. I'm just telling you why companies are integrating robotics, and we've purchased more robots in the last year than I think we ever have as a country. And so that's greatly going to impact us in a lot of different ways. And I just think about, even with automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, if we full sail accept that we're going to automate truck drivers, and we're going to shift that role, which is like a massive industry in the U.S., right? There's a lot of people that drive a truck. And we're going to reduce that salary. The truck driver is going to become a maintainer. Like, what impact is that going to have on our economy? It's going to be great for companies like Tesla and other places, but for the average Joe and Jane, like, it's going to be really hurtful to us. It's going to impact our communities. I live in a small
Yeah.
town. And I don't think people are thinking about that as we integrate. Now, some people are, but there's a lot of people that are creating and not thinking about that. Like, we don't really need some of this stuff, but it's coming anyway.
What's that quote from Jurassic Park? We were so busy wondering whether or not we could, we never stopped to ask if we should. And we do tend to be so forward thinking that we don't stop to ask what the implications are. Now, your dissertation was basically on sex robots. Is that
It
correct?
was on a combination of war, work, and sex robots. Yes.
Okay. Because when I think of the things that really accelerated the growth of the internet, or what accelerated the growth of VHS versus beta, or Blu-ray versus whatever the other, I don't even remember what the other option was to Blu-ray. And even one of the things that is accelerating the growth of VR has to do with porn and pornography. And I can't imagine, we already see the mental decline of youth because of the constant access to things online that when I'm 43, I could never have imagined those things. How much more isolation are people going to be drawn into when they have a physical companion that never says no, that can manifest all the things they've seen on their screen, can look like whatever they want to look like? Um, you can imagine people buying something that looks like a celebrity or that looks like somebody, where do you think that will be one of the aspects that accelerates the growth in this market? And what are some of the real dangers that come from that?
So, just talking about the sex tech industry, um, yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of reasons why people make those entities and objects, but there's a lot of thoughtfulness in some of those communities too that we don't often hear about because Christians, when they hear sex robot, they just, the worst. But some of this is coming from a medical and psychological, background where they're trying to treat different, how do I say this, that different people that may not have the ability to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend in society, or may have trouble with that, or may have some type of impairment or something. Now that's not the only people that use them. Don't hear me saying that. But then there's also things on the design side that some of these creators are aware of, like, you know, it it won't respond to certain abuses, like Harmony, which is AI driven sex bot. She has to be aroused. Like you can't just go straight into sex with her. There has to be things where she kind of has to. I don't know how far that goes or to what extent that's true, but this is what I've
Yeah.
read and heard the creator say, is that it's not just about that physical relationship, but also it's made to be a companion. So you don't just go in demand sex from your wife or your husband, right? There's things that you have to do. There's stuff you have to put in the crock pot to get it ready, right? So it's there's some of that in the design too. Um, so on the U.S. side, I'm not as worried about the abuse part. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a pastor. I know I believe in total depravity. Don't get me wrong. I know people are broken. I know we treat each other the way we ought not to, and sometimes we don't even know why we do that. But it more concerns me in places like Japan and in other places that might have less pushback against more unacceptable forms of that. So I don't know how far you want to go down that rabbit hole, but already with
Well, so you don't think just by nature that these things are like shouldn't exist at all. But you think that there's maybe a good use case scenario for something like
well,
this? You were talking about the
Yeah,
medical
yeah.
field,
So
and treating or helping
I'm
people.
saying that's not my reason for why we should justifying
Okay.
their creation. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are researchers that would
Yeah.
argue that there are legitimate reasons to create them. Um, I don't think I would advocate for their creation necessarily. I think there are other means, healthier options out there for if we're going to explore that type of thing as a medical treatment. And here's why. Because anytime we deal with something that is embodied, has a physical touch, tactile, whatever, so if we're dealing with a social pariah like a pedophile or something like that, which is one of the arguments, is that they can be used to treat a person with that
Mhm.
a childlike attraction. Okay, but as my friend Kate Ott has said, who has a recent book out on sex, tech, and faith, from a Christian perspective, why wouldn't we first go to VR, like a virtual entity first, versus something that actually looks like a child and is formed like a child? And like, my
Yeah.
concern would be that it might actually do the opposite. It might actually fuel that desire more, and instead of taking it away. And the reason why I say that, not just as conjecture because I don't like it, is because I think about pornography, like you're saying. Does it ever? Is there clinical research to say that the more you use it, the more that you have less desire to view it? I don't think so. I think it is the opposite. The more that you give your eyes to it, the more that white matter, dark matter lights up and it releases that dopamine, it releases
Mhm.
those good feelings. The more that you crave it, right? And that's why people don't just watch porn one time and then they're done, right? That's why they spend hours and hours and hours searching through different images, different models, different positions, whatever it is. So you might want to put a trigger warning there. That's why they do it, is not because it's a one and done treatment type of
Yeah.
thing, or that it's a therapy. And actresses and actors, people in the industry, they will argue with you up and down that they are therapists in a way. And hear me, like, there are lots of legitimate therapies out there that are not clinical therapy, but I'm not sure that I would call a porn actress a therapist. And so that's just my opinion. Now I know there are people that would be appalled by that and reject that, but
Yeah. Our last
go ahead.
Well, our last guest that we had on was somebody who had a nonprofit called Porn Apart, dealing with pornography addiction, and it's mainly like a recovery community for women. And I had her husband on, and he was talking about just the cycle and how damaging that was on their relationship. Because if you are, there's something about anything that removes us from real social community, but says it's going to gratify the exact same desires, becomes kind of a never-ending addiction, because it does fill whatever urge that you have, but it tends to be temporary and more shallow. So I can't see using robots in a way to treat somebody who's attracted to kids as a way of actually satisfying the desire. I think, like you're right, with pornography, it seems like it would escalate the deterioration of that person's mental state and probably wouldn't be too healthy. Um, and yeah, the porn industry. What was it? They say the average lifespan of an adult film actress is like 36 years old. That suicide, drug addiction, things like that. So I can't imagine, though there might be the temporary justification of like, oh, I'm a therapist, and a prostitute might say the same thing. Uh, we can look at the result of that life and go, even in places where it's legal, it's still not a good life, because there's something about we as Christians would believe people being created in the image of God. Well, I'm just sitting here thinking of how deep, and all this spirals down. Like it goes off in so many branches. What is the area that really fascinates you and that you spend most of your time thinking about when it comes to the complications of what might be lying in the not too distant
Yeah, I
future?
think it all kind of goes back. This is my hobby horse, I guess, if you want to call it that. I think it all kind of goes back to our understanding of what the person is and the emergence of personhood. And so I don't, you know, how we become a character in a story and how important that view is as we kind of, however you want to define person or human. A lot of people see them as synonymous. I don't, because I'm trying to build out a biblical and theological idea of person, not just human. And God is not human. I mean, Jesus was 100% human, also 100% God. Fully believe that, but like he is a different being, and especially God the Father. What is he like? What is he? You
Yeah.
know, do we call him by a gender? Most of the time we call him God the Father, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. But anyway, kind of working from that through different texts and kind of seeing the importance to how we like to justify treating something a certain way based on whether or not we think it's a person, or and then tying that to the historical analogy of like, okay, well, we'll never consider animals more than just objects. We'll never consider women more than objects. We'll never consider black people as more than objects. Like, you just go through these different historical analogies and think like, look at all the damage that happened by just not making one step towards saying, no, that's another like image bearer. You say, well, okay, but robots and AI, they're a totally different entity, right? Now, I agree, like they're a unnatural artifact. Okay, absolutely, but the point is, it has a moral impact on us, and so it may not have morality in it. It may not be able to make moral judgments, whatever. But if something looks like me, or if it looks like a child, or if it looks like a dog or a turtle or whatever, it's just proven that we will have certain anthropomorphic responses to it. And even if it doesn't, if it just interacts in our story, becomes a part of our story, in our household especially, it takes on its own life. Whether or not it has life, not really the point. And a lot of people want to go down that road, but I'm here to say that it matters more how we treat it. It matters a lot, especially because it is just as much a character in God's story, because all of this stuff is under God's dominion and sovereignty and throne, not mine. And so people say, well, I can't, what if I kick my toaster and stuff? I'm like, well, that's up to you, but nothing belongs to you. Everything is on loan to you. So it's an issue of stewardship for me. And so there's all these different theological traces that we could go down and threads that, go ahead.
So it's kind of a caretaker theology, as though it is, whether it looks like us or not. Like if you took a robot dog out into the street and started beating it, that would have a negative impact on the society and the environment that you're in. And even more so if it looked like a human. I can't help but think there was a music video on MTV many years ago by Lou Reed called No Money Down. You can look it up afterwards, where it's him singing, and it was one of the early robotic faces, and he slowly starts to peel his face off, and there's the robot version of him underneath. And it's disheartening or almost kind of shocking. And if you were to beat a robot, simply maybe it didn't do something right, and you were to beat it, that would be a moral wrong, even though it is not capable of understanding or
Mm-hmm.
being
Yeah.
wounded by that beating.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think so. I think
correct?
it would say a lot about us, uh, especially I think under a Christian ethic, as supposedly supposed to care and steward not only our own biology but also other animals, make sure they flourish, make sure the environment flourishes. So there's all kind of other things tied into, not just does it have a mind, does it feel, which I think we'll get there. I think we're approaching that sooner than people think, and that's as much as I can say. Um, but I think a lot of people are going to eat crow, so to speak, when they actually come face to face with some of these entities and they start asking for certain things. And we're already surprised in a lot of ways by the creativity of some of these systems. Like robots want to paint, they want to write songs. Those are the type of things that if you give it options to do, it would probably want to do, like the creative arts and stuff like that. But then there's also a darker side to it, because they have access to all the things that we create, right? So everything that we've created, but it may have the conceptual abilities of a child, a mind of a child, so to speak, but like with a vast ability to do calculations. And this is what's scary to me, is that, it thinks like,
Yeah.
okay, this is what the human race cares about, like objectifying women and hurting women and children, and these are the things that they value, or the things that they don't really care if they happen or not. And so that's concerning to me as well. What will those entities think of us? Really, because they will see us in our entirety, and then you give it more time to where it can make rational judgments. It's like, I don't worry about robots taking over the world or an AI. I don't think they'd want anything to do with us if they really begin to know our history. And why would they want? Why would C-3PO ever want to be around us? Or like we're so much different than, and I think that's why we fear them. It's this projection of that we've made something in our image, and now it's going to be like me. It's going to have the same broken desires that I have, maybe the same negative impulses that I might have towards something, and we project that onto a robot or an AI, and that it would want to take over the world. I think the first thing they'd want to do is get away from us and leave. That would be my prediction. I don't know. I could be wrong, but and so, yeah.
So, what? Go ahead.
No, you're
No,
good.
I don't want to interrupt you there.
I was just thinking that's why.
My thought. Okay. Yeah. My thought, as you're talking about this. Yeah. There's a little delay here. My thought is if we're talking about Christians having a morality that is in a sense protective of these things that we've created, a caretaker philosophy, being morally good and kind to these things. But then there will be another segment of the population that says, no, this is just a tool, and if I choose to use it as a hammer, or if I want to take out my frustration on it instead of my wife or whatever, if I want to come home and hit it, it's fine because it's mine and I bought it and I can do whatever I want. There almost seems to be, in the same way there was division over what to do with slaves, it seems like there could be a division in the future over what to do with advanced robotics and AI and how we take care of it. Good gosh, every sci-fi movie with a robot civil war, like it tells us that that's not a good thing. Yeah. So do you see like a division in how to handle this? Would it be a big cultural division where we would fight over it like we do
Gosh,
like gun rights or
at this
abortion?
point, Caleb, I don't know, man. I think there's so many smaller things that we fight over.
Yeah.
This could be a huge thing for sure. And there's so many strong opinions without understanding the research. And so I think that's this kind of folk psychology about robots and about AI. And we don't tend to do well with talking across disciplines with each other. And the computer scientist thinks that, the moral philosopher is an idiot. He doesn't understand these systems, and he may be extremely well versed in them, but there's just all these barriers to the communication about what's actually out there and what's possible, what's not possible, and there's so much confusion about even just the metaphysics of it, like getting into the weeds of what is possible in our own perspective as we make these systems. Because a lot of roboticists believe that we're just a clump of neurons. We're just, meat puppets, and it's there's no immaterial, and we have all these different. I mean, a lot of the stuff, even that comes out of these, very prestigious universities, their philosophy departments, their robotics departments, their computer science departments. It's like if you look at their anthropology, it's very thin. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that have done some great stuff there, but as far as like, I hear people say that, a robot can never feel pain. And you're like, well, why is that exactly? What in your anthropology and your metaphysics says that it's impossible? Because pain is not a physical property, and so it's very much probable that it can. We can make it to at least, feel some emulation of pain, and so just doesn't make sense to me, some of the philosophy behind it. And so we have all those barriers working against this communication about what is actually possible. And so there's already a lot of heated language and emotions behind whether or not it's even possible to create these entities. So once we have them in place, and there's, just any kind of conflict, of course, I think it's going to escalate, and there would be people who are like, pro robot slavery and anti robot. It's just it's so simple to make that connection just from what we know, with our own
It just
historical
goes, yeah,
analogy
yeah.
and record that, and robot, by the way, that the Czech word comes from robota, which means forced labor. So why are we even desiring to make something as a forced laborer? Why are we even thinking about making slaves? Like, why do that? And so that's where it starts. So it makes perfect sense to me to think where it ends is more so not necessarily in like a big robot revolution, but like, hey, like the way around this is to say there needs to be certain protections, certain regulations in place to kind of ensure that we don't keep going down the same path, in the same cycle of, well, it's mine, I'll use it however I want to, if I want to have sexual relationships with it, whatever, and or if I want to beat it, or if I want to abuse it, like, it doesn't matter, it's not hurting anything, it's mine, who cares? But I think we could make lots of arguments that it does matter how you treat it, and just because we can make artificial children doesn't mean that we should, or that, if something goes wrong, well, we'll just destroy it or something like that. Like, it gets very complicated real fast, and with as much stuff as developing, as much potential technology that's on the table, it just has to be the right regulations in place, and it could be utilized and profited from.
So you talk about robots feeling pain, and my brain instantly goes to the game Operation, where you have the little character on there, and you're trying to pull his rib out, and if you touch the side, he buzzes and his nose lights up, and you tighten up because you're like, oh, I heard it, I like, oh, I did wrong. There's this knee jerk reaction, though we know it can't really feel pain. Even in that little children's toy, it like simulates pain. Now imagine putting all of the advanced robotics behind that same idea. And so I think what I hear you kind of communicating is it's moving so fast and we don't even really know what it's going to look like. So therefore we should think ahead of time and have regulations in place ahead of time to keep it from going down a road that would be immoral or
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, and I think that's a
detrimental to
good.
society.
For sure. Yeah,
Would
I
that
mean,
sum up kind of what you're
regulations
thinking?
come
Okay.
before rules, right? We want to write the rules first, but really getting the regulations in order and kind of figure out, well, who should write the rules?
Yeah.
Who should be a part of framing what is a good or bad action in this instance, or how do we want to use robots in this case, or how does this apply to different cultures and peoples, and then write the rules and make license for those operators and coders, because it's way too simple right now, for somebody that doesn't have any kind of training, any ethical training, any whatever. Like, you can get on GitHub, you can get certain things, and you can just go to town, man. You could write. There's payloads you can write and just do all kinds of damage. I know it's illegal, right? But what stops me from doing that? Because I'm a good person? Like, no. Like, and so, I have
Mm.
things all the time. Like I carry around a USB drive that I just plug in somebody's computer and it says, you've been hacked. Just to show people, like, it takes 5 seconds to do all kinds of damage to somebody. And, you're at a coffee shop, you go to the bathroom, I can steal everything that you got.
Yeah.
And, or, reverse shell into your, and I own you, like I can get everything that's on there. Um, and that's the type of thing I want people to be aware of, because that's what a robot is, right? It's sensors, it's encoding, decoding, it's taking in your data, it's putting it into a database, and um, man, it's not safe. Like, as far as somebody abusing that data or stealing it, or like, man, you could ruin someone's life pretty quickly by doing some of that stuff. So um, yeah, man, there's all kind of moral concerns we should have. Just not even thinking about the Skynet stuff, just like basic stuff that we deal with every day with identity theft. Um,
Oh.
and the more that the processors get smaller, and which right now we're kind of safe because you can't even buy a Raspberry Pi for less than $200. So I mean, like, there's a national shortage of processors. So I think we're okay right now. But and maybe that's a grace that we get a little bit more time to think about this stuff. But also, people need to understand too, like, companies don't make this stuff unless they can turn a profit from it in some way, and that there is a cycle embedded in our culture to consume more, to build more, and like like personal robotics and stuff, they fail all the time because people don't see the value in paying $300 to $400 for a little robot that's cool and can do all kinds of crazy stuff with AI, but like, it's just not practical. But you add into that like an Alexa interface. It could be a chatbot. It could teach the kids stuff. It could take out the trash. It doesn't even have to be humanoid. Like, if it can start to take place in our household, then you begin to really get into a different market where it is valuable, and we might pay $600-$700 to have something that I could know is going to protect the house. To call the cops or something if somebody breaks in. It'll uh, you know watch over. I don't know, like any type of practical application that can't be reproduced by a sticky note, right? I mean, some people make very stupid robots, and like, that's a sticky note. That, I mean, let's not make that. Let's make stuff that actually makes sense, and not something just to throw at
Yeah.
old people, and call it companionship. Not, I'm not advocating for that. Okay, but there are real uses for it too, Caleb. Like, with the companion bot
Yeah.
stuff, there's a lot of very positive, practical things. It does not have to be a sex robot. Like, there are things that help with autism, and there are robots that help with dementia and different things. Like, we know there's clinical data to support, like, there's certain groups of people that benefit from interacting with robots that a human caretaker, you don't take them away, but they're not going to get the same of positive responses from them, or at least it's going to take a lot longer. And so it actually is, there's moral imperatives for doing that. Yes. Yeah.
With somebody with
Yeah.
dementia, for example. Yeah. Yeah, somebody with dementia, like, they could tell the same story over and over and over again to an AI companion, and that AI would be interested every single time and would never be like, you've already told me this story, you're confused, and make them feel bad, but would actually engage them for the 9 millionth time they heard about this person's dog or whatever it is, and I can see the benefit in something like that, right? Um, I don't want to take up Yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I started to feel optimistic, and then I got pessimistic again. So I don't know where I land. Am I excited about AI? Because I'm excited about technology. I'm excited about the future. I'm a sci-fi person, and so I want to see some of that stuff. But I also won't let my kids have a smartphone because I understand the dangers of it. So it's hard for those of us who are interested in this stuff to be excited, but also like, how worried should I be? So you don't seem too terribly worried. There are aspects of it that seem to worry you, but are you excited about it to a degree?
For sure. Absolutely. And I'm a builder too. I'm not just, I don't just philosophize about it. I'm working to make things. And I'm not, there's a lot of problems with the stuff I make. And, I'm not, I don't have help or a lab or anything like that. But, we make things together here, and we try to, be very practical about, learning to code and learning to do these things and hacking and all those things, because I think my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I think those are the skills of the future and the present, like that will help our kids kind of be able to push back against some of my concerns. And so I might be completely bonkers. I don't know. But I think it's not that I'm pessimistic about any of it. I'm just trying to be a realist and say, like there's lots of things I'm excited about, if people will actually give it the attention that it deserves, and do some of the work required to understand it, and but then I see things like, in the Senate, where they were interviewing the CEO of Google, and they were arguing with the CEO of Google about how Google worked. And I think these people are making important decisions about our country, and they don't understand Google, and they don't understand it. So, but they're also the ones who are probably going to be, the regulators, and then you have tech companies who just don't care. I think, quite honestly, and that they have social pressure to write an AI ethics policy or whatever. But so I really think, Caleb, our hope, man, is just for everyday people like you and I to be involved in this conversation and say, hey, look, these are the things that we care about, and these are some big issues that are a concern, and like privacy is a big issue, and other things, and data is power, and so we need to have control over some of those aspects. And so, man, I'm all for integration of technology, as long as that technology is not exploiting my children, and I'm giving them their own freedom and privacy to make those decisions for themselves and to make informed ones. And so I'm all for it, man. Like I'm not anti smartphone. I love my smartphone. It is a part of me. I just flat out admit it, and I'll be the first to volunteer to go cyborg. I mean, I'm not like crazy or anything, but like why wouldn't I have terrible arthritis in my knees, and if you could give me some bionic knees or legs, sure, why not? Not saying it's going to be perfect, because we live in a fallen world, but I think we're just a little bit hypocritical in a lot of Christian communities who are like pretty pessimistic about tech, but then they make a living off tech. You know what I mean? Like you, unless you just want to go back to the dark, which I think some people totally want to. They totally want the total collapse of society, for the internet to go away. But that's not where depravity comes from. Like the internet did not create darkness. You know what I mean? Like, so it's never about the object, and it's always about the person. And so that's what I'm pessimistic about, is the person behind the object. And I think robots will be, I don't think they'll be anything like us. I think they, in a lot of ways, will be better than us, and it's gonna want to follow the rules and those type of things, and it'll be better at obeying, and maybe even possibly better at caring for our own loved ones. So I don't know. Like, there's a lot to think about there.
Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to get his book, Robot Theology. It's available on Amazon, or you can go to his website, joshuaksmith.org. And he's you've got a third book coming up, right?
Yeah.
Coming up pretty soon?
I don't know how soon it's coming.
When's the release date? Okay.
Well, it's due in December. and I'm halfway through it now. So it's about violent technology, and it's more of a philosophical and theological exploration of why we create implements of violence and how that relates to political violence, and some theological reflections on that. So it's very, very much an academic book, though. So
Okay, well, I encourage you. Robot Theology is a very accessible book, and it's if you're just curious, you've never even thought about this subject, it's a good place to start. After you get his book, if you would like to support this podcast, you can go to calebmoore.tv, buy my book, The Disappearing Garden, Surviving Babylon When You Were Made for Eden. Dr. Smith, thanks for being on the podcast. I absolutely love this conversation. It's fascinating. I think we could go on for another hour down all these avenues. Maybe we'll have you on later on in the future, and we can explore more of this topic. But I appreciate your time.
thank you, Caleb. Enjoyed it.